Hello and welcome to the Anarchist News Review. With me tonight I have Andy Meiger. Hello, Andy.
Hello.
And we have obviously, if you hear any pops and cracks, it's probably because people are letting off fireworks just outside. So apologies for that if that happens. But for our own agenda, this is going to be less um, anonymous slash Guy Fawkes related. It's going to be Zohran Mamdani's victory, which has energised much of the left, even in Britain. And obviously, parallels are being drawn already with Zach Palansky as the pound shop Mamdani to Farage's pound shop Trump. But at region level, obviously the purse is much tighter, and there's a lot of centralisation and hostility from the centre. In the UK, we're seeing implosions from Kent Council in Reforms Borough, which has been reduced to claiming Tory savings as its own, while failing entirely to take the sort of hatchet to public services that it was hoping to, and in Lancashire, where Reform is also having to close care homes and daycare centres. Then over in the activist scene, we've had a pair of sentences handed down to Just Stop Oil members, with two people being found not guilty of criminal damage to Stonehenge after a cornflour and orange dye incident, and six people being convicted for climbing a gantry on the N25, notably having been denied the right to offer their reasoning to the jury. The heaviest sentence for this latter could, in theory, be 10 years. We will round off with a bit of chat about freedom stories of the week, including the targeting of Elbit Systems insurer Allianz in Europe, the conviction of 10 students in Leicester for protesting the university's complicity in arms trading, and the infamous lethal police raid on a favela in Rio recently. So, with no further ado, I will ask Andy, what do you think about Mamdani's victory from an anarchist standpoint? I can't imagine we'll be the happiest people in the room, but maybe not the most miserable either.
Exactly. It's the argument, I suppose, from the anarchist point of view, is always that um, without us pulling on the far left, then things do not happen in the middle left or the near left, or it's about pushing the whole political discourse leftwards, and that is we can happily take that as a win, I think. Um, And I suppose the best bit, he has, as we're about to come to, relatively little influence, even in New York, and Trump may have him shot in the next couple of weeks. But it has annoyed so many people having a Muslim mayor, particularly when Trump is so angry about London's Muslim mayor that it does warm the cockles of your heart to see someone actually getting up and making some stances for oppressed minorities and for radical socialism. So yeah, quite a cheer about that one in the swamp of bad news that we've been having for God knows how long.
Yeah, I mean, obviously from an anarchist perspective, we will tend to uh, be the ones in the room saying, well, it's all very well having an election and maybe a socialist winning power, but what does power mean under these circumstances? And obviously the what I was referencing in the introduction was the way in which uh, reform has been finding out the hard way that centralization of power tends to undermine the ability of supposedly insurgent political scenes to actually enact many of their, you know, more interesting ideas, I suppose. Uh, and I think, like there was a guest on Novara Media, which obviously happens an hour or so before we come on, who was saying sort of meekly, well, I don't want to sound like too much of an anarchist, but obviously there are limits to what can be achieved by a Mandani government, sort of immediately sort of trying to um, underline and I suppose inoculate people against taking too much or going too far with saying, a socialist is in power in New York now and therefore everything's going to immediately improve. Like the amount of forces arrayed against even the relatively tepid socialism that Mandami is proposing, let alone his more radical ideas, is going to be quite something. And, Trump has already said in a very typically blunt Trump way, but one which would have been reflected in even an Obama administration, I suspect, to some degree, is that he's fully planning to sabotage Mamdani wherever he possibly can and try and make sure that the socialist experiment of whatever you want to call that isn't going to work. And Mamdani, we were talking about this last week with Mike, is in the same position as the Greens are, for example, in the UK, where or your party, where without a working class activist base, like leverage from the grassroots, what he wants to achieve is going to be considerably harder, to say the least, if not impossible. And the idea of holding on to it becomes very difficult to see, because obviously at the moment that, let's assume that Mamdani has a couple of good innings in him and that makes a load of decent reforms, whoever gets in afterwards immediately starts to roll all those reforms back, etc., etc. So I think, yeah, without sort of being the immediate gloomy Gus in the room, it is important to be like, well, okay, so this guy's been elected, but the nominal power that he has is not the story, really. And it's not going to be the journey that he's taking.
But we come on to the counter side of the inertia of the political machine, is that reform can't do all the shit that they were planning to. So yeah, there's something to be said into the there is. Were we better off with the likes of Dick Cheney, who was a cunning evil man, or we better off now with a really stupid evil man in charge in the US?
Yeah, I think Cheney's legacy is like Trump is to a degree Cheney's legacy. Like one of the things that I think one of my less charitable inclinations is to say that I'm glad that Cheney lasted as long as he did, because he got to see what became of his party, its descent into madness, and the throwing out of everything that he regarded as a Republican principle. And I hope he was bitter. I hope he was a deeply embittered man at the end of his life. Um, but his brand of self-serving barbarism very much was, the old Marxist line, obviously, that you make history, but not in circumstances of your own choosing, is very strong in those situations. I think that Cheney, the kind of man that Cheney was, and the kind of coterie that he had around him, took a historical direction and accelerated it. I think that one of the things that Mamdani doesn't represent is a historical direction, and I think that's an important distinction to make. And I think the same again would be true of the Green Party or your party if they managed to gain a degree of power. And one of the things which popped up today was an FT analysis by Katie Martin of the bond market's reaction to Rachel Reeves. And obviously, the Labour Party, as we know, in the way that it stands now, is actually an example itself of the way in which the flow of history fits people to it to a great degree, more than people fitting the flow of history to them. The Labour Party, as is a functional part of a direction that we've been seeing since Reagan and Thatcher and since the neoliberal turn economically. But Reeves, basically the FT's position is saying the bond market's are very, very relaxed about Rachel Reeves, because Rachel Reeves has said and done nothing to suggest that the bond markets will be targeted by the Labour government. Individuals' taxes it might be a political problem for Labour. Some of the richest members, individual members of society might, and again, that is a political problem primarily for Labour, and maybe an economic problem down the line, but the bond markets don't seem to think that it will be in a way that affects them and them getting paid. And as a result, the bond markets have remained very steady over the whole tenure of Rachel Reeves' chancellorship. And the FT is very blunt in saying this. It's saying basically the bond markets think that their fiscal disciplining, or in fact their effective deposing of Liz Truss, when Liz Truss wanted to do something a bit radical economically, has spooked economies around the world on no more stark terms than the UK economy, because obviously Rishi Sunak directly afterwards rode back on basically all of the things that were worrying the bond markets. And Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer have clearly learned a lesson and have said the last thing we are possibly going to do is spook the stock markets, spook the bond markets, and get ourselves in financial sturm through not being able to borrow money, through I think there was that arcane section of the pension sector which looked like it was going to go belly up to a horrifying degree for many people's pensions, and the overall result of that is that Labour has steered a very conservative course. And I think that I don't think anyone should be under any illusions, because we've seen this pan out again and again, is that those kinds of very powerful financial systems centered around the city have repeatedly been able to say to the supposedly sovereign government of the UK, no, 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 you can't do that. You can't take that decision. It's not allowed. You have to live within your means, and that means you have to pay the piper. And no party potentially getting into power, and that includes reform as well, would be able to do really drastic economic measures in the ways that many of them would like to, perhaps. Although, whether reformers thought that far ahead, whether the Greens have thought that far ahead, let alone your party, is up for debate. But if they had a fully costed, like Corbynite Labour 2017 and indeed 2019 had a fully costed economic programme. So what else you liked about them, that they had a fully costed programme. But it's very unclear how much of it they would have been actually able to or allowed to implement, because the bond markets were always standing over them with the proverbial sword of Damocles, in case they did anything which really was going to screw with the wrong people, essentially. And that's a national level. That's this is Westminster, the supposedly ultimate power in British economics, right? So yeah, it's not in any way, but you take that level of weakness in deciding your own economic future, and then you drill it down to the vastly less enfranchised and empowered level of councils, which is where we get onto reform. And you end up, anybody who has dealt with or researched or done any journalism around local council politics over the last 20 years will be well aware that councils have been restricted further and further, primarily through centralisation, from being able to do what they want to do. They can't fundraise to do major building projects. They can't run their own energy companies like they used to be able to. They have very limited tax and spend powers. Even the amount that they're allowed to raise council tax is strictly controlled by Westminster. And reform have run straight headlong into this problem. So Kent Council have been claiming all these kinds of savings, but most of them are actually Tory savings, or are very unclear as to where they're finding this money. Most of it is to pay down debts. Um, the court in Cornwall, they're struggling there as well, and in Lancashire, they're having to cut services because they just have no other choice. And all of these kind of claims about, oh, there's loads and loads of woke DEI and blah blah blah. It's all gone up in smoke. None of it existed because all of these cuts had been made through multiple rounds of austerity before, under Osborne primarily, under a Tory government. This has been imposed upon local councils. Um, and I think this is
Why did
worse
we
in the
have to have
UK.
that austerity again?
Huh?
Was it? Why did we have to have all that austerity again? Was it
Oh,
to help the banks?
yeah, pay pay off all of our debts. Yeah, worked fantastically well. We are now entirely out of debt, and the economy is going. What was it, gangbusters? I think it was that Boris Johnson um, was going for. Uh, but yeah, these. I think it's a worse phenomenon in the UK than it is in somewhere like New York because the mayors of New York have more flexibility with their own finances. But Trump was still able to say, "I'm just going to cut $1 billion from your income from um, federal payments and all the rest of it." And I have no doubt, he will find other ways to cut income and sabotage things uh, in the next wee while. Um, Even before it gets to January, I would fully expect that the finances of New York will take a bit of a battering. Um, And that will then, of course, be used to demonstrate that socialism can't function, um, which, in very practical terms, isn't 100% wrong, right? Like, it's not that you couldn't come up with a functional socialist model, say, which is congruent with capitalism. I don't think it would be efficient. And I think it would probably it would lead to a lot of bullying of the given polity that does it, but it's not necessarily an impossibility. The problem lies with you aren't trying to build this socialist capitalist economy in a vacuum. You're trying to build it within the heart of empire, right? Like America is the most capitalist country in the world. It's the most aggressively culturally capitalist country in the world, I think is probably fair to say. Um, and it can and will ideologically punish movements towards socialism um, within its own borders. And we've seen this historically, right? Like this is not the first time that there's been a socialist in government in New York before, even. Um, there's been lots of attempts in the US to run relatively socialist outfits or left-wing outfits, and they do tend to come a cropper because capitalism in the US doesn't accept these things and will go out of its way to destroy them, even if it seems quite self-destructive in many ways.
Yeah, I suppose coming back to the first point of um, electing um, jolly socialist mayor is that the anarchist argument is that unless you directly tackle the financial sector and say it's a useless parasitic element on society, much more so than the asylum seekers, the scroungers, and the other layabouts, because it just takes money and it provides nothing useful, then you are always going to be in hock to it. And you're right, it's socially conservative because it's not even prudent if governments were all to stop borrowing and pay back the national debt, the financial sector would be ruined. The same goes for people conned into the myth that you can pay into pension funds that are somehow the goods and services of the future can be stored up. They can't. It relies on the next generation being able to do the work to sustain and pay that in the future. And so it is. I think if there's the little anarchist devil on his shoulder poking him, it's to poke him to say, yeah, but the whole capitalist system has to go because otherwise the partial solutions will not be allowed to work.
Yeah. Um, uh, don't know, Abel. Says there used to be a form you had to sign in the earliest part of the 20th century to say that you were not an anarchist in order to migrate into the country. Indeed. And it was also, there was the infamous deportation of Emma Goldman and Alexander Berkman, I believe, to Russia, along with many other people, which took place during the last significant moral panic about anarchists in the US. But yeah, I mean, I think if there's one standout bit of advice, I suppose, that the wildly successful UK anarchist movement could offer to the US. um, like, I think I think your initial point about the um, emotional boost that Mamdani's election produces is a worthwhile thing, and it offers a gap in the uh, generally fraught and depressing conversational tone that could be quite useful to build at least a sense of, okay, so don't trust Mandami to save you, and don't trust him to like build socialism using the tools of the ruling classes. But take this moment to suggest to all and sundry, every community, look, the most important thing is to make yourselves independent of the ruling class. It's not about whether the financial system can find a kind of a balancing act with the socialism of Mamdani. Maybe it can, maybe it can't. Almost certainly it will spend most of its time trying to destroy him. It's about saying to people, look, there is an appetite for mutual aid. And that doesn't have to revolve around where we can get money from Central Hall. It doesn't have to revolve around getting cash from NGOs or, you know, the city or whatever, or waiting for socialists to sort it out, the professional class of socialists to sort it out for us. Like, all of these tools, all of these opportunities are within a short walk of your own front door, in the form of the people around you. And if these people are enthusiastic enough to vote in, and you know, Staten Island aside, the absolute, you know, stalwart Republican base of in New York City, you can see on a map now where the people are who are most likely to support those kinds of endeavors. And the opportunity, I think, is there. Like, if the energy is there, the enthusiasm is there, then you can start building mutual aid projects right around. And those are the base, which, you know, any political project, Mamdani included. Like, if Mamdani is going to be successful, if you're an electoralist and you feel that you need the levers of the mayoralty needs a strong, reliable working class presence that can hold them to the promises that they make. Force those promises to be enacted, because otherwise it's all pressure from the city, right? It's all pressure, well, not the city, that's London, but it's all pressure from the island. It's all pressure from Wall Street, telling him what to do. Um, so yeah, best of luck to everybody in New York in the next few years. I suppose we can round off with that. Moving on to a good and bad news story. We had two people who were set free after they were allowed to make their case for why they covered Stonehenge in a completely reversible cornflour and dye mixture. And then 6 others who were not allowed to make their case were convicted and now face, in theory, up to 10 years for disruptive activities on the M25. Obviously, Andy, as our resident legal eagle and a activist court aid brigade person, what are your views on the court cases, and indeed what else has been happening in the legal system recently?
Well, it's a bit of a shocker. First of all, we do not expect people to get convicted at Southwark Crown Court when people are being acquitted in Salisbury. That is just against all our experience of the jury system. So it's quite surprising. There are explicable reasons. One, obviously, the Stonehenge one inconveniences no one. There's three of them, actually. The third is the getaway driver. And that's what makes it a conspiracy case and why it's in the Crown Court. Because the criminal damage itself will be such low level, it would just be in the magistrates. So in a way, they've got it lucky by having the state try to do them for a more serious sounding thing. The M25 stuff has had mixed results in the courts for the trials that we've had so far. Most notably, Roger and his little crew getting very heavy sentences indeed for the planning of this operation. And we are still going through a large number of trials for people who were being the foot soldiers on it. But you come to that what actually gets you off with a jury and how to approach that if our listeners and viewers find themselves in that unhappy situation. Now, it used to be the case that judges could order juries to convict people, saying the evidence is overwhelming, you've got to convict them. And in the 1980s, there was a famous case of Clive Ponting, civil servant, who leaked stuff about the sinking of the Argentinian cruiser Belgrano. He leaked it to an MP, and when he was done under the Official Secrets Act, he said, well, you can't be done for telling an MP stuff. And the judge directed the jury to convict him. And the jury said, fuck off. And he was acquitted. And there's a number of similar things are happening. And the judiciary responded to this very cleverly. They got rid of the idea that judges could direct juries. And instead, they introduced something called the route to verdict. So if you're ever on a jury these days, the judge will set out a list of legal directions and then a route to verdict, which are yes and no questions. So you can follow the law, making up your opinions on the facts. And rather than this pissing juries off in the way that a straight you've got to do this, it has proved incredibly effective at making juries do the right thing, because even when they often send in questions to the judge saying, well, we don't really think they've done anything bad, but you're saying that and the judge will patiently explain, yes, well, I've got to explain the law to you. You just decide the facts. And don't worry if I've got the law wrong, because the Court of Appeal will overturn me if I've made a mistake. And it's all done in a really friendly and nice sort of way. And it's led to far fewer acquittals of people just saying, oh, you should let me off because I was doing a good thing. Because the system has got very good at that. In the last couple of years, we've seen a big uptake of defences being removed. defences like with criminal damage, that you were that the owner would have agreed to it if they'd known what a good cause you were doing, or Colston statue case is a good example of that, of it being public property. Um, that defences were removed because pulling down statues is apparently violence. So we've had some bad judgments there. And Judge Perrins, who sits at Southwark and hates all protesters equally, which is his sole claim to judicial fairness, has been very, very strict on enforcing these new things, and has in fact jailed a couple of people for contempt for just saying to the jury, ignore what he's saying, just let me off anyway. Whether the actual effect of being allowed to talk a lot about the climate crisis in your defence is very helpful, I'm not so sure, because I've listened to some cases where they've gone on about that for a long time, and you can see the jury nodding off. And it may be that some of the good burghers of Southwark and inner London, where a lot of the previous Insulate Britain cases, which I went to a few years ago, were thinking, oh, I just wish this lot had stopped rabbiting on about the climate. I might have let them off earlier, but they're getting on my nerves now. So it's a very difficult and subtle thing. It's until a couple of years ago, not allowing people to give evidence or call expert witnesses on the subject of why they've done stuff was quite important with something like Palestine. For example, most people in this country had no idea that Britain supplied weapons to Israel, or which companies did it, or what the consequences were. Now that's a little clearer, because there's been a lot of publicity for reasons unknown and 70,000 dead. With climate change, it is something that really, I'm not sure it swings much with a jury, because there has been 20 odd years of talk about climate change. There is no one who has grown up in this country in that period who will not be aware that climate change is an issue. You're hardly, the factual element in there is not so important as how you present the case so that you should be acquitted. And I'll give the example. I was at Southwark a few years ago, and one of our barristers was representing both in a Palestine action case before they were banned, I hasten to add, and a JSO case. And he basically came out of one court after saying, yes, but these people have got personal knowledge of what's happening and people being killed right now in Palestine. It's not like some airy-fairy thing in the future like climate change. And then he ran downstairs, went into the climate case and said, these people aren't supporting terrorism like some Middle Eastern fanatics. They are nice, good, upstanding British people just trying to protect the environment. Now, whether it's how you angle that at a jury, and it's a very difficult trick to pull off.
Well, yeah. I mean, in terms of in terms of the actual sentencing, so with the 6 who've gone down for the M25 stuff, there was talk of it being up to 10 years. What are your general thoughts on the likelihoods?
The maximum sentence for public nuisance is indeed 10 years. When it was made a statutory offence under Section 78 of the Policing, Crime, Sentencing and Courts Act, they actually reduced the maximum sentence that used to be life in prison because it was a common law offence. Strange. It's the actual sentences that have gone up. Now, people have got years in jail before. The famous one being the football betting scam, where a crew took out the floodlights at a Premiership match to delay the start so that they could place bets, and they got 4 years. But protesters didn't. Protesters got a slap on the wrist. Trenton Oldfield, who swam in front of the boat race, got 6 months. The only big difficulty for that was they had to find a judge who didn't go to Oxford or Cambridge to sentence him. That took quite a long time because there weren't many. But it was very unusual, and we were quite shocked at the time. Since the statutory stuff has come in and a Court of Appeal, well, 2 Court of Appeal judgments, one on the people sitting on the Dartford Bridge crossing, one of whom got 3 years, and then Roger Hallam and his crew getting, which actually got knocked down to 4 years on appeal. But they were the leaders in the conspiracy to do it. What I would expect for the M25 ones is they will be getting something in the 1 to 2 year range, and then the judge will look at that and say, can I suspend this sentence if you give an indication that you have now given up the life of crime and will protest peacefully and start writing to your MP, and you say so in your probation report, the pre-sentence report, then you'll likely get a suspended sentence. If you stand up and say, I don't believe in your justice, you wigged up cunt, then it's probable that you will go straight to jail. But jail is no longer frightening because Lammy's letting everyone out straight away as soon as you get put in jail, apparently. One of the 2 people that is in the news today actually got sentenced by video link to 45 months, and one's with let him straight out, which is an absolute bargain of I do Wandsworth being London's biggest prison. It used to be UK's biggest prison, but we've built some supermaxes up in the sticks now. Has always had a reputation for being totally incompetent and rubbish. They must have been really stung when Chelmsford just let someone else and got all the publicity. So they've let 2 people out, one of whom they didn't even bother to tell the police for 6 days to give the guy a head start. So a big,
It almost
big
makes
shout
you feel
out.
sorry for Labour, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Almost.
Not quite.
Yeah. Cool. Are there any so on the general topic, are there any court cases coming up that people might want to be keeping an eye on?
The biggie is the Palestine action starting on the 19th of November off the top of my head, but I will check that and we'll put an amendment up. This is for the Bristol smashing up. It's only the first 6 people out of 24, I now believe, who are charged with it. These are the ones who actually did the action. Funnily enough, they're getting a trial before the people who are all apparently helping them in this massive conspiracy to do it, and that will be at Woolwich, I believe, Crown Court, and is likely to run into next year. Lot of complex legal arguments and a very serious case because they are also accused of violent disorder and a GBH on one of the security staff there. So they are facing very, very serious consequences indeed, should they be convicted. But yeah, we shall see how that pans out. But we'll have more details when we're actually closer to the time of what people can do to support, because sometimes they shift these things around at the last minute, because terrorism cases can either go to the Bailey or to Woolwich, which is the traditional terrorist court, because they don't even need to take you away in a van. They've got a tunnel to Belmarsh Prison. It's all very grim and unpleasant, and very difficult for supporters to get to, which is one of the reasons they put it there, because they don't like the high publicity of having it at the Bailey. So that's the biggie. There's obviously lots of things still coming up, but quickly on the people trying to get Palestine action deprescribed, nothing will be happening until March, when the test case will be done before the Chief Metropolitan Magistrate, Mr. Goldspring. Another silly name for the court. Similarly, a lot of the Ben Jamal and Chris Nynham case, which is the lead case for the large numbers of people arrested for disobeying police conditions on demos, that's held over till next year, because of a Court of Appeal judgment that ruled that changes to the Public Order Act weren't done lawfully, creating a mess. The government are trying to fix that in the crime and policing bill that is currently filled with all manner of things that I will not even try to start tonight, because people want to sleep.
No, start because people want to sleep.
Exactly, yeah. So yeah, I suppose while we're here, we could sympathise with the Leicester aggravated trespass kids.
Oh yes, although I will say before we get onto that one, it's also worth noting that 2 prisoners have begun their hunger strike. This is Prisoners for Palestine are doing the updates on this, if people want to keep an eye on that. They are demanding bail, right to a fair trial, and to stop the use of counter-terrorism powers against anti-genocide protesters. And they started on 3 days ago on Balfour Day, and it's Kessa Zara and Amu Gib. And they are due to be joined apparently by a bunch of other people who are also currently in prison. And they are going to be, generally the idea will be to escalate it, I think, to get more eyes on. But yes, keeping an eye on that is probably a good plan. The free speech, the Leicester students. So this is one of 3 stories, which we picked out to round off our broadcast tonight. This is Free Speech on Campus Only for Racists and Transphobes. This is an article by our very own punk academic, which is about 10 Leicester students who've been convicted for protesting the university's complicity in the arms trade, the silence of the rights of supposed defenders of free speech, speaking volumes in the view of punk academic. I don't know what's been going on with this case. If you want to fill people in.
Shouldn't spoil Punk's article, but and there are going to be appeals. So I'm not, even if I did want to spoil Punk's article, which I'm tempted to, it's probably best that we don't reveal all the legal shenanigans at this point. We don't even know whether they're going to have a rehearing at Crown or go straight to High Court. But it will. There will be future developments. I think we can say. But it is a bad thing for student protests, just in the universities thinking that they can get away with doing that sort of stuff. there will be negative publicity for any university that does so, and it will affect their ability to attract students, particularly foreign students, which they rely their money if they're going to start arresting people for very low-level peaceful protests. And the thing is that it's aggravated trespass, and that it's not like they started a fight and the police have come and arrested them. For aggravated trespass, the university has to say that they're trespassing. They could easily have stopped the case at any point. Yeah, they brought it down, and I do feel sorry for the kids today. I was arrested when I was at university, and I fessed up, and I went to see the master of the college and said, I've been arrested, I'm in court next week. And he said, oh, we haven't had one of those for years. Can I come along? Great fun. Yeah, it's not like it used to be, I'm sorry to say. I was acquitted, by the way.
Oh, good. Yeah, no, the general, and sort of again without going too much into punk academics territory here, but also worth noting that there has been multi-year campaign undertaken by the right-wing press, primarily the Times, the Telegraph, but also the Daily Mail to a degree, which is banged on about free speech on campus solely from the perspective of, well, all these gender critical people need to be given the right to say what they want, and oh goodness, Charlie Kirk should be allowed to spout his garbage, and this is about free speech and the ability to debate and all the rest of it. And yeah, again, the moment it's not one of theirs being told their free speech isn't worth a dime, the silence is incredibly heavy across the pages of the press. Always worth noting that one, even if it's incredibly reliable on their part, I feel. So we will round off with two stories, one being the Elbit insurer Allianz was to be targeted in 8 countries in a major action. This is obviously Elbit Systems, for those few of you who won't know already, is an Israeli arms manufacturer with significant holdings in the UK, multiple factories, which were the ones that were being attacked by Palestine Action when Palestine Action was prescribed. Fortunately, the UK government's inability to deal with direct action protest notwithstanding, Elbit are seeing significant amounts of resistance in Europe as a whole, and using the general strategy, which has proven very effective, which is why it gets banned, of attacking the suppliers and associates of said company. Allianz is one of those as an insurer, and it's been attacked in Austria, France, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Spain, Taiwan, and Birmingham. So well done to all and sundry in countries other than the UK who were merrily taking on the supporters of Elbit. Good stuff by all. Can't possibly be illegally inciting things in the UK by saying that things which happen in Europe are great. So there you go. And finally, in Brazil, so this is more of a feature piece, really. It's a look at the favela raids in Rio in Brazil. And this was when 2,500 people, policemen rather, went into the favelas of Penha and Almao with an warrant to arrest hundreds of people, supposedly making up a major drug trafficking cartel in the two favelas. What actually happened was they went in mob-handed, as you might expect, with a heavily armed police presence going into a favela. Lots of people got shot. Not all of them drug dealers, or indeed people who were drug dealers who might deserve to be shot. Extrajudiciary killings abounded, and this is an article basically looking into the ruling class and its interaction with both the drug gangs in those favelas and indeed with the police themselves. It notes that the favelas have been oppressed by the very people who the police went after, but the police aren't really helping by scattering gunfire all around town, among other things. Well worth reading, and noting that the anarchists in Brazil, considering it as a state approved social hygiene measure, which, yeah, very problematic on a number of levels. All right, on which note, thank you very much, everybody who has watched tonight, and we will see you again next week. Thank you, Andy, as ever, for your insightful commentary, and we shall see you soon. Cheerio, and happy bonfire night, obviously.